My name is Nicole Hobbs. I am one of the co-founders of EveryDistrict. I'm also our organization's executive director. And I have here with me Drew Morrison, who is one of EveryDistrict's other co-founders and is the organization's political director. And we're here this evening to tell you more about EveryDistrict and our work to flip state legislative districts and state legislatures blue, and to talk to you about how you can use our data work to strategically raise dollars for state legislative candidates in flippable districts. And from tonight's presentation, we most importantly want you to walk away with these two key takeaways, which is first, how you can use the data resources on our website to understand the competitive state legislative landscape, and second, to learn how you can become a fundraising champion with EveryDistrict to help make change in critical states across the country. So we'll start by talking a little bit more about the data resources on EveryDistrict's website. And I'll start with this disclaimer that we're going to get a little bit into the weeds on some of the data work that we've done. And so we hope that those of you who really like political data will put your questions in the chat. We have left some time at the end of this so we can have a Q&A and want to have that back and forth conversation. And for those of you who are less so data people, don't worry, we will get to the point in the presentation where we'll talk about how we make it really easy for you to use these data resources to get involved to support these candidates. But first, a quick history about EveryDistrict. We were one of the many groups that started after the 2017 election. We both have a background in local politics and campaigns. We have a third co-founder who is not able to be with us this evening, who also had a background in local campaigns. And following the 2016 election, we all wanted to get involved to make the next election very different from the election that we had just experienced, but we didn't want to wait until 2020. So we started looking at Virginia, a state that we know many of you on this call are very familiar with, and trying to understand how we could get involved to support candidates who are on the ballot in Virginia in 2017, and specifically state legislative candidates. And what we learned was that in kind of late 2016, early 2017, there was no national organization that was putting out information on a district by district basis about the competitiveness of state legislative districts. I'm sure, like many of you, we eventually found VPAP, which is a fantastic Virginia resource. And from there, we were able to learn a lot about the electoral history of competitive state legislative districts in Virginia, along with key fundraising data. And so using that information that was available on VPAP, we at EveryDistrict were able to figure out some districts and candidates that we wanted to invest in. And we ultimately endorsed 10 of the 15 successful challengers who flipped state legislative districts in Virginia in 2017. But when we wanted to take this program to other states in 2018, the challenge that we had was that there weren't VPAPs in other states across the country. And so for us to do the same work that we had done in Virginia to strategically target flippable districts, we realized that we were going to have to build this information ourselves. And this led us to the resources that are on EveryDistrict's website today, which is the EveryDistrict map. And to this date, the EveryDistrict map is still the only public resource to provide a competitiveness ranking for every state legislative district across the country. And since our founding in 2017, we have worked in 7 states, helped to flip 48 state legislative districts from red to blue, and raised over $750,000 for the candidates that we've endorsed. This year, in 2020, we're pretty significantly scaling up our work. So we're going from having worked with 100 candidates in 7 states over the past 3 years to working with 100 candidates in 11 states this year alone. And as you can see from this map of the states where we'll be working in this year, there are a lot of states that make sense when we think about broadly the US electoral landscape. We have a lot of states in the upper Midwest that was previously the blue wall, where we are looking to rebuild post 2016. And there are also some new emerging states like Arizona, Texas, and Georgia. But most importantly, these are all states where our data work shows an opportunity for Democrats to make a strategic gain at the state legislative level, either by flipping a chamber or breaking a Republican supermajority. And critically, across these 11 states, Democrats do not hold either state legislative chamber in any of these states. And this is a really critical year for us to make progress at the state legislative level. So to dive into the data, so what we've done at EveryDistrict is we've created a competitiveness ranking for every state legislative district across the country. This is proprietary to us. We call it the EveryDistrict LDI, or Legislative District Index for short. And what feeds into this score is previous election results, previous statewide election results. That might be a Senate race, a gubernatorial race, a congressional race, other statewide races. And we take those election results broken down by state legislative district, put that into a formula, which is the work that Drew does as our political director. And that gives us a number on a scale from 100 to negative 100. Positive districts lean Democratic, negative districts lean Republican. So for example, a district with a score of negative 10 would on average vote for statewide Republicans by 10 points. And what the LDI does is it gives us a sense of the baseline competitiveness of that particular state legislative district and whether there's an opportunity for Democrats to flip that district. And in the target states that we're working in this year, more so than the individual LDI score per district, the most important metric is whether or not we've endorsed a candidate. And to show you exactly how you can utilize this data work to understand the competitive state legislative landscape and to find competitive districts where you can help candidates flip those districts from red to blue, we're going to show you two example states, the first being Arizona, which is a state where we are investing this year. And then the second is Kentucky, a state where we are not investing this year. So when you go to the EveryDistrict website and you click on one of our states, this is what you'll see, which is the EveryDistrict map. And we have a map for all 99 state legislative chambers across the country. So here in the Arizona Senate map, we've actually endorsed 3 Arizona Senate candidates, and those districts are highlighted in yellow. It's very easy to see the one very big yellow district, and then there are actually 2 yellow districts that are very close to each other, that are 2 of these kind of emerging suburban districts that we're seeing in states across the country. These are districts where not only does our data work tell us that these are competitive opportunities that Democrats can flip this year, but these are also districts where we've actively reached out to the candidates who are running in these districts. These candidates have gone through our endorsement process, which involves filling out a questionnaire and providing us with relevant information about their campaign. And really what an endorsement from EveryDistrict means is that this is a district that our data work shows we can flip from red to blue. And this is a candidate who we feel confident is running the type of professional and competitive campaign necessary to flip this kind of tough district. And when you look at the map, you'll see a couple of other colors. So perhaps not shockingly, dark blue districts are safe Democratic districts. Dark red districts are safe Republican districts. And then we also have pink districts. These are districts that are on our watch list, and I'll talk about what this means in a little bit more detail in a moment. But these are districts that our data work has identified as potentially competitive, but we haven't yet endorsed the Democratic nominee in those districts. Now, all of the maps on our website are interactive. So if you go to our website, everydistrict.us, you'll actually be able to click on the map and learn more about each of these districts. So here you can see I've clicked on the kind of big yellow district on the map. And this is Arizona Senate District 6. For those of you who are really familiar with Arizona politics, they call them legislative districts. And this is a district where we've endorsed the candidate who is running for state Senate, Felicia French. And when you click on one of the yellow districts on our map, you'll be able to learn more about the candidate that we've endorsed who's running in that district. We have their photo, we have a short bio, and we also have ways for you to donate and volunteer for that candidate with the links that are included when you click on that district on the map. If you click on a safe Democratic district or a safe Republican district or even a competitive district where we haven't endorsed a candidate, you'll still see our district ranking and our LDI score, but we won't have information about that specific candidate. And even though we are map people, we know that not everyone is. So we also have on each of the pages of target states on our website where we've endorsed candidates, we have a spreadsheet so you can learn a little bit more about the candidates that we've endorsed along with the other districts in that specific chamber where we haven't made endorsements. So here you can see we have the 3 districts that we've endorsed where their status is yellow. We've got the names of the candidate. You can see who their opponent is. In this case, 2 of our candidates, Doug and Christine, are running against incumbents, which are denoted by the little asterisk next to the name of the GOP candidate. And we also make it really easy for you to donate directly to these candidates and to click on their bio to learn a little bit more about each of these candidates and their stories. You'll also see at the bottom the LDI scores for each of these districts. And when you look at this, you'll see that there's actually one district, Senate District 17, that has a more competitive LDI score than 2 districts where we have made endorsements. And this example really embodies our endorsement process and how seriously we take endorsing candidates and giving candidates the ability to say that they're an every district endorsed candidate. Doug, Felicia, and Christine, who we've all endorsed, they're all second-time candidates. They ran in 2018. They all came heartbreakingly close in their races, and they pretty much didn't stop running after 2018. So when we sent them our questionnaires earlier this year, it was really clear that they already had a very robust campaign operation up and running, and we felt confident being able to give them our endorsement. In Senate District 17, this is a district that our data work shows to be competitive, but the candidate in that district got in right before the filing deadline and has still been working on setting up their campaign operation. So we've been in touch to evaluate his campaign, but we're waiting a moment to make sure that he really is putting in place the type of competitive campaign that's necessary to flip this competitive district. Now, at every district, we like to say that our name is both literal and aspirational. We have literally done the data work for every state legislative district, and one day we hope to be able to work with Democratic state legislative candidates running in every district across the country. But right now, we unfortunately don't have the capacity to do that. So in states where we haven't made endorsements, there are still ways that you can use our data resources to find competitive districts where you can get involved to support candidates. We have Kentucky here as an example because this is a state where we've gotten a lot of questions about why we're not endorsing state legislative candidates in Kentucky. A lot of folks have asked us, knowing that there's a competitive Senate race in the state, doesn't it make sense to take advantage of that competitive top of the ticket race and invest in down ballot candidates? The problem is that when we look at the state legislative races in Kentucky, we don't see the same level of competitiveness as in the other states that we're working in. And as I mentioned, when talking about our target states, not only are the states that we're investing in key states for us to win back the White House and to oftentimes flip or hold key Senate districts, but these are states where specifically our data work shows an opportunity to make that key gain at the state legislative level, which we don't see in Kentucky. But there are a couple of competitive districts. So here you'll see one yellow district. This is a district that we've given, as you'll see by the spreadsheet, a ranking of R-lean D. This means that this district fundamentally leans Democratic, but is held by a Republican. And these types of yellow districts represent the strongest pickup opportunities for Democrats in a state like Kentucky. You'll also see we have a couple of districts that are lean R districts. These are districts that have slight Republican leans, but with the right candidate running a competitive race under the right conditions, these are districts that could also be competitive. And you'll see that there are kind of 3 pink districts on the map. And then in Kentucky, we also have a lot of lean R districts. These are districts that are held by Democrats, but fundamentally lean Republican and are really important districts for us to hold. And we have quite a few of those in Kentucky this year. So while we don't have as much information about candidates, while we haven't done the vetting process on state legislative candidates in Kentucky, if this was a state that you feel passionate about, or if there's another state that you feel passionate about, even if we're not endorsing in that state, you can still use our data work to find the competitive districts and then do your own homework to learn more about the candidates who are running in those districts. And with that, I want to transition to talking about the work that we do to support the candidates who we endorse. And the primary support that we provide to our endorsed candidates is funding. Why funding? Well, this really started from the work that we did in Virginia in 2017. And as we started to look at the competitive landscape in Virginia, a question that we asked ourselves was why Republicans were so dominant at the state legislative level in a state that otherwise had been trending blue statewide for several cycles at that point in time. And when we started looking at fundraising from previous cycles, it became really clear how much Republicans had outraised Democrats at the state legislative level. And this is still a problem that persists to this day. In 2018, we endorsed over 60 candidates across 5 states. And after the election, we did an analysis of our candidates to help better understand why those who won were successful and why those who lost were unsuccessful. And what we saw was that on average, our losing candidates were outraised by $250,000, which was a gap that they just couldn't make up. But on the flip side, as we've seen in Virginia, and we know there are a lot of folks on this call who have been very involved in the success story that is Virginia at the state legislative level, what we saw in 2019 and also in 2017 was that candidates who flipped districts oftentimes actually outraised their Republican opponent and in other cases kept it close. And this is really critical for state legislative candidates to be successful. During the Obama years, Democrats lost almost 1,000 state legislative seats. A strong top of the ticket is not enough to be successful at the state legislative level. These candidates need to have the resources to be able to run their own independent, competitive campaigns where they can reach out to voters, introduce themselves to voters, and make sure that voters know who they are and will vote for them when they show up on election day or this year, perhaps, as they fill out their mail-in ballot. But the good news is that state legislative races are cheap and a little bit of money can go a long way. The bad news is that we're still seeing this lack of money trend play out. We did an analysis earlier this year that looked at how Democrats and Republicans were starting the year in fundraising just in competitive races that we plan to target this year. And what we saw was that Republicans have a 2-to-1 money edge in these key races. But there's something you can do to help us close this money gap, and that's to become a fundraising champion with every district. At every district, our mission is to make fundraising fun and easy for everyone. And we start with our data and research, which we've just talked at you about a lot. But suffice to say, we've done a lot of work to understand the competitive state legislative landscape, to understand the candidates who are best poised to flip these districts so you don't have to. We make it really easy for you to invest strategically in state legislative candidates by doing all of that homework. So all you have to do is the fundraising piece. The other benefit of the large number of candidates that we'll be working with this year is that we can work with you to develop a slate of candidates that matches your interests. Oftentimes our fundraising champions will say, we're happy to fundraise for anyone. We just, want our money to be given to the candidates who are most in need. But we also have some fundraising champions who are really interested in fundraising for pro-choice women, for candidates who have a background in education, for candidates who are medical professionals. We have folks who have an interest in a particular state. And so we can work with each of our fundraising champions to develop a slate of candidates that matches your particular interests. And not only are you raising for candidates who match that interest, but you're also raising for candidates in a way that will strategically help Democrats flip key districts. And the final piece of this is that we work with you to reach out to your friends and family to make your fundraising program a success. And while there are certainly many downsides to the current moment that we find ourselves in, it is much easier to host a Zoom fundraiser than to have people over to your house. You don't have to worry about cleaning up. You don't have to worry about ordering the wine or ordering appetizers. All you have to do is invite your friends to join you on Zoom to learn more about competitive state legislative races. And we found this to be a really effective way to tell the story of why state legislative races matter, which is something that we haven't really talked about this evening. We know there are a lot of people on this call who already know about the importance of state legislative races, but it's really important that we tell this story to other people because there are still a lot of Democratic activists who don't understand why state legislative races are so important. But Virginia is a great success story to tell. And we saw this year with the legislative session that happened earlier this year in Virginia, what the difference between Democratic and Republican control at the state legislative level means. And this is the story that we have to tell to as many people as possible across the country to encourage Democrats to get involved, to support candidates in these key districts, and to maximize the effectiveness of the resources that we're giving to state legislative candidates. And if you work with us to host an event, we make it pretty easy. We provide the sample text to send to your friends. We provide the RSVP link, the donation link, the Zoom link, and all you have to do is send an email to your friends and encourage them to join you to learn more. We've done Zoom fundraisers with 5 people on the call and had it be a really informal conversational event. We've done events with 10 to 15 people on the call, with 25 to 30 people on the call. We're happy to work, if you want to work with us to help reach out to your friends and family to tell the story about state legislative races, we want to help you do that no matter how many people you can reach in your network. So let's work together to flip districts blue. I will leave this slide up, which has our website. It also has the link to the EveryDistrict map, and it has my email as well. So we are happy to take some questions now. If you have a question that you don't want to ask in this format, feel free to email me. And if you are interested in becoming a fundraising champion with EveryDistrict and learning more about our fundraising program, I hope that you will be in touch. So with that, I will turn it back over to Stair to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Nancy Morgan asks, what are the criteria which you use to determine competitiveness, and when do you get the and where do you get the underlying data? Well, you did discuss that to some extent. So,
and we can dive into the details on that, and I will actually turn that question over to Drew, who is the one who does all of the number crunching for us.
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, we look at past statewide election results, Nicole mentioned, and what that can include are presidential results, what happens in a governor's race or a U.S. Senate race, how that plays out in that specific individual district. And then we basically do some regression analysis to figure out which races best explain what happens at the state legislative level. And then we come out with a number to calculate then how competitive it is on balance. And this is somewhat similar to what things like the Cook PVI do at the congressional level. the one thing that we take it from there, as Nicole mentioned, was to really look at the quality of candidates to be able to win in those districts. And really what we're asking there, as Nicole mentioned, is what's your connection to the district? Do you have a reason that you're going to be able, particularly in more Republican-leaning districts, to be able to win these challenging districts because of your quality of candidacy, your connection to the community? Do you have a sense of the set of issues you're talking about? Because much of our fundraising works with folks who have a shared set of interests. And then do you have a plan to win this election? You might not know all the answers as a first-time candidate, but you have a sense of the things you need to do, because we want to make sure that folks, our fundraising champions who are raising for candidates, have a really good, strong sense that the folks they're working with are quality candidates who know how to win and know how to use their resources. And that piece, the sort of candidate piece, informs when we end up working.
Okay, we have another question here to please review the 6 rankings. Our favor. Yeah, our favor. Yeah, thank you.
Great. That's a great question as well. And so the 6 rankings basically go from places that we're going to be paying attention in on the left here to places that we're not going to be spending as much time on the D safe. So R lean D, these are districts that are held by Republicans that lean Democratic. So on average, they tend to vote for Democrats other than the person who happens to represent that state legislative seat. The most jarring example I use there is the Center City, Philadelphia district until 2018 was represented by a Republican, and it voted for Barack Obama by 20+ points. So those are the best pickup opportunities. The R lean R districts are held by a Republican and lean basically by 1 to 5 points on average towards Republicans. And these are the districts that in a good wave year, like we had in 2018 and like we hope to have in 2020 if the polling continues to play out, that are the most likely to then sort of be brought on board in a wave election. And that's the bulk of the districts that we're working on in 2020, because we won a lot of the R lean D districts in 2018. The R favor R districts are that next round of more challenging district, and they tend to lean Republican on average by 5 to 10 points. The reasons that we'd work in an R favor R district in 2020 really often has to do with the direction or the shift of those districts. As many of you know, particularly working in Virginia, college-educated women in particular are really shifting heavily towards Democrats. So we've seen some districts that are really fit that mold, and that's another round of data analysis we do, try to find where's the next group of districts that are shifting our way. And a lot of those still have voted for Republicans 6, 4, 2 years ago, but they're shifting towards Democrats very quickly. And then the next category before the safes, which are ones we're not working in, D lean R are the places that folks need to be mindful of from a protection standpoint. These are democratically held districts, have a Democratic representative, but they lean Republican. And some of those districts, if we look at our friends in Kentucky here, are districts that are more maybe ancestrally, as they say, Democratic. You can see those districts in the eastern part of Kentucky, the Appalachian part of the state. Or there may be places that we've won that were a little more Republican 2 years ago, and they're still sort of historically a little more Republican, but a Democrat's been able to take control. And those are the places that the caucuses and others need to be mindful of to try to hold on to those challenging seats.
Nancy Morgan says, in your analysis in the states, what percentage of seats are competitive? Is this share changing, and what are the factors influencing this competitiveness?
So it really varies from state to state. A good example here in Arizona. So Arizona has 30 state senators and 60 state reps. And there's a pretty narrow path. There's basically about between those 90 total seats, you're talking about 5 or 6 seats total that folks are really looking that might change hands. So fewer than 10%. In a state like Pennsylvania, you have in the Pennsylvania House, you have probably upwards of 40 districts that could shift one way or the other in this election year. And I'd say the big difference is that the states with the larger opportunities for shifts are states that are going two ways at once. There are states that are seeing big Democratic gains in the college-educated suburbs, and then more challenging Democratic losses in places that Democrats have held in the past that are less college-educated, more rural, and shifting towards Republicans. So in Pennsylvania, in the Philly suburbs and the Pittsburgh suburbs, we're seeing big gains. In the center of the state, in the more formerly industrial areas, we're seeing more challenges. So it really varies based on the specific context of the states.
Okay, there's a question in the chat. Whoops. Yeah, okay, yeah, there's a question in the chat. Is there more information on the website about how you calculate the LDI?
Yep, we have a page on the website that speaks to how we do that. Did you want to add more?
Nope, that's what I was going to say. We have a Q&A on our website that answers some commonly asked questions about our LDI score.
And basically, we also did a regression analysis on the LDI to see how accurate it was and use that to refine the LDI this year. And basically, we've got with over 90% accuracy the ability to predict the results with the LDI scores we've developed.
Okay. How are the gerrymandering or anti-gerrymandering changes, California, Michigan, affecting the competitiveness of districts?
So there have been a few states that have had to redraw maps as a result of state-level Supreme Court decisions, since the US Supreme Court notably decided not to get engaged on the gerrymandering issue. And a notable state like that is North Carolina. And the changes made in North Carolina are definitely enabling us to win more seats in 2020 than we certainly could have been able to in previous iterations of the maps. But in many states, the maps remain pretty heavily gerrymandered toward Republicans. The worst example of that in a state where we're working is in Wisconsin. Famously, in the 2012 elections, Democrats won a majority of the vote across the state when they were picking their state reps. So Democrats won a majority of the overall statewide state rep vote. That year, Republicans retained a supermajority. More than 60 of the 99 seats in Wisconsin were held by Republicans at the end of that election. So that's the worst gerrymander that's out there. The good thing is that despite the fact that most gerrymanders remain in place, in many of these core 11 states, we have the opportunity to win enough competitive districts to make a difference. And sometimes in the past, Democrats have thrown up their hands and said, it's too gerrymandered, we can't win. But what we're finding is we can. There are the districts if we invest in them. And then we'll go after 2020 and solve the redistricting problem from there.
And there are states like Michigan is one example, Ohio is another example, where we will see post-2020 some nonpartisan redistricting committees or other kind of commissions that are doing the map drawing as opposed to the state legislators, but those haven't been put in effect for this year. So we are still in those states running under the district lines that were drawn post-2010 that were drawn to favor Republicans.
Here's an interesting question. How likely is Virginia House and Senate to stay under Democratic control?
So that's going to be, there's a couple of different factors that will come together there in terms of what the maps look like after 2020, and then also the broader sort of questions about what we'll see in terms of response. I think that we feel, and having worked to elect a lot of them, we feel pretty good about it, that the sort of common sense leadership, the sort of policies that the Senate and House legislators have pushed is going to create an enduring majority. We also think that the demographic shifts in Virginia, in contrast to the periods in the past when we've had a majorities, are really going to be able to sustain that support. And we know from the cases that did shift the lines going into the 2019 cycle that fairer, more equitable approaches to districting are also going to help represent Democrats in Virginia, because at this point, Virginia really is a majority Democratic state. So we feel good that Democrats are in a good position to retain a majority in the state legislature past this year. Of course, there will always be bad years and bad cycles, and we've seen those in Virginia, and we've seen those when Democrats get elected to the presidency, which we certainly hope happens this fall. So nothing is out of the question, but we think that this is definitely a different Virginia than in the past, and that Democrats can hold on to the majority based on the work that they've done.
There's a question here about money. So can you evaluate how much impact $1 spent can impact a race in Kansas versus North Carolina?
Yes. So if you really want to dive into money, we encourage you to go to our website, everydistrict.us, and we have a map on our homepage that you can click through. And on that map of our target states, we show what we describe as the kind of minimum viable raise that a competitive state legislative candidate needs to raise in that state to run a strong campaign. And this number varies widely from state to state. So in Kansas, if you're a Kansas State House candidate and you raise $20,000, that's enough to run a competitive campaign. If you are running for the Pennsylvania State Senate and you don't raise at least $1 million, you probably have not raised enough money. We went through after 2018 and did this analysis by looking at what candidates raised in the 2018 cycle. And we did this not just by looking at the average raise in all races, but by pulling a select group of races that were competitive or should have been competitive to see what Republican and Democratic candidates who won those races raised. And that's how we came up with those numbers. And you can go through and see our state by state raise recommendations on our website.
Thank you. Which Republican senators are the most vulnerable in the states you cover?
Sure. So in terms of from a U.S. Senate standpoint and really trying to identify the overlap there, and we can maybe go to the full 11 state map. You've clearly got a lot of focus this year on Arizona. That's one of the top pickup opportunities, and the communities that we'll be working in at the state legislative level are really overlapping with where the Democratic candidate for Senate, Mr. Kelly, is going to be emphasizing his efforts as well. There's also some really great opportunities in North Carolina, where Democrats have a strong candidate in Cal Cunningham, and the Republicans in North Carolina are increasingly unpopular. Georgia is seeing 2 competitive Senate races, and there's going to be a lot of energy and focus on making a difference there. Iowa and Kansas both have competitive races. Iowa is probably more competitive. If folks saw just this past week, Amy Seltzer, who is this renowned pollster who works for the Des Moines Register, she identified that Joni Ernst is losing to her Democratic challenger thus far. And so there's a real opportunity to win that seat. Kansas is going to be a little more of a coin flip depending on who the Republicans end up nominating, which may be Chris Kobach, who lost the governor's race in 2018 and is broadly disliked throughout the state, which could make that district or that state very competitive. And the last thing I'll note is Michigan. Michigan is one of the top Republican targets this year, running against Democrat Gary Peters. And so far, Peters looks to be in the lead, but there's going to be a lot of need to make sure that there's a groundswell of energy for him, because I saw polling today for Senator Peters that said 51% of Michigan voters didn't know enough about him to determine whether or not he deserved re-election. So there's going to be a need to energize and activate all sorts of voters. And a great way to do that, as we certainly saw in Virginia in 2017, is to start at the state legislative level. So really across the board here, Arizona, Kansas, Iowa, Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia, we've got a lot of overlap with what the Democrats are trying to do at the US Senate level.
Do you all offer a longer explanation of why state legislative races matter?
Yes, that's not something that we have discussed that much this evening. It's something we talk a lot about when we do fundraising events, because we find that these audiences, even if they're, a lot of folks from the DC area who work in the federal government, people who live in other parts of the country but give to federal candidates, there's still a real lack of information among Democratic activists about why we should care about state legislative races. And we certainly talk about this a little bit more on our website. If you're looking for some talking points, we talk about 3 key reasons why this year in particular state legislative races are so important. The first, which Drew just covered really well in the previous question, is that investing in a state legislative candidate is a really great investment in the entire Democratic ticket. So by investing in a state legislative candidate in one of these states, you're helping the Senate candidate, you're helping Joe Biden win back the White House, win back the Senate, and also hold our congressional majority. Gerrymandering, another question that we got tonight, is another key reason why state legislative races matter so much this year. And while in states like Michigan, there have been better controls put in place post 2020, it is still the case that in a majority of states across the country, it will be the state legislators who we elect this year who will be the ones drawing the district lines, not only for themselves, but also for congressional districts. And so if in these key states, like Pennsylvania, like Wisconsin, like North Carolina, we leave that map drawing in the hands of Republicans, it's not just our ability to hold or flip state legislative chambers in the future, but also our congressional majority that could be at risk. And finally, we as Democratic activists need to care about state legislative races from a policy perspective. And really, there's no better example of this than Virginia and what we saw come out of the legislative session this year. There were longtime Democratic priorities that, our previous governors in Virginia had wanted to make progress on, but had been unable to because the legislature wouldn't send them bills to sign. But this year we saw some pretty strong movement on environmental policy. We saw gun safety legislation passed. We saw the minimum wage raised. We saw additional protections on women's health care and women's reproductive rights enacted into law. And I could go on, and a lot of you are very familiar with this. But this is the really important story that we work to tell to folks across the country about why state legislative races matter.
Thank you. Nicely put. Do we have any more questions? I don't see any more. So what would you say would be the first thing that we should do to get started? It's just go choose a candidate in another state, right? Or go choose a state level candidate and invest some time, maybe some money in them.
Yeah, pick a candidate, pick a state, pick an issue that you care about. And really, we're here to help you do that. We've talked a lot about the data resources that we have available on our website. And for those folks who are interested in doing their homework and figuring it out on your own, you can certainly do that. But we're here to be a resource. We know that the state legislative level can be a little bit overwhelming. There are 7,383 state legislative seats across the country. So it's very hard for any one person to be able to figure out how to invest strategically given that large number of races. But that's what we're here to do. So if you're motivated to get involved, please send me an email. You can go to our website. There are also ways to contact us via our website. And we'd love to work with you to talk about how we can put together a slate of candidates for you to support and also how we can work with you to help you be a successful fundraiser for state legislative candidates. We've worked with lots of folks, from people who are professional fundraisers all the way down to people who have never been involved in politics before, to help them do fundraising for state legislative candidates. We've got lots of tips and tricks and resources to make your fundraising and organizing campaign for state legislative candidates a success.
Thank you very much. We appreciate this opportunity to learn more about EveryDistrict. We all love all of this data. So thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who attended tonight. I hope everyone has signed up for the Women's Summit. I am going to put that URL in the chat. Okay, so this is one of the marvelous programs that came from the Women's Summit submissions. And we hope to be back with EveryDistrict next year. And if we're completely blue, do we have any place in EveryDistrict anymore? Do you still look at us?
Yes, we will
Okay.
definitely be back in Virginia in 2021.
Good. Well, good. So we can get ready. We're used to being the only game in town, you know. So.
Yes, you do have that.
Okay. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone.